Donald Trump's terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day continues in the aftermath of his disastrous defeat at the hands of Vice President Kamala Harris in last night's debate. And it's so bad that when a prominent Fox News host acknowledged that Trump lost the debate and had a pretty brutal interview with Trump surrogate Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Donald Trump snapped and ranted about that Fox host on Truth Social. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, as I said at the beginning of the day, today and probably the next day are going to be a series of victory laps taken on this channel. I'm a cynic by nature, but I was optimistic that the vice president would dominate Donald Trump in the debate, and she did. And since Donald Trump still may yet win the election, that is very much possible. We have to savor these moments when they come, and there's so many moments to savor, like just more content that you could possibly imagine. So I imagine this is going to spill over to tomorrow night. But for context, Neil Cavuto is a prominent Fox News host, conservative. He's known for having tough interviews of both Democrats and Republicans, of Biden supporters and Trump supporters. And he has two eyes and a functioning brain. He saw the debate and he saw Vice President Harris dominate Donald Trump, and he acknowledged that. And Donald Trump didn't handle it very well. So here is Cavuto acknowledging the outcome of the debate. Then we'll get into Trump's reaction as well as other things that Cavuto had to say about the Trump debate today.
You know, this very quickly, Bob, is the first time he had 6 prior presidential debates to this one. But this one, at least in my liking, and you're the expert here, he decisively lost it.
Oof. So Cavuto here, again, spitting facts, as the kids would say, talking about Donald Trump's vast experience in presidential debates, both, in general elections and 3 election cycles now, 2016, 2020, and 2024, and also in a number of primary debates, particularly in 2016. And yet, despite that vast experience, he lost brutally. It was the worst defeat he ever suffered, more brutal than defeats he suffered at the hands of President Biden in 2020 and Secretary Hillary Clinton in 2016. So, yikes, you would think that he'd be more polished and better than ever, but Donald Trump is clearly diminished. Yet despite that, Donald Trump's sensitivity is higher now than it's ever been, even though he insists, hey, listen, he's insisted throughout the day, I won the debate. I won by like 90% according to the polls. Well, he's quite triggered by what Neil Cavuto had to say. Neil Cavuto, Fox's lowest rated anchor, is one of the worst on television. I actually prefer the losers at CNN and MSDNC. Donald Trump is clearly not handling well the fact that people don't share his rosy assessment of the debate against the vice president. Unfortunately for Trump, not only does Neil Cavuto at Fox News, a prominent Fox News host, not share Trump's rosy assessment of the debate, so too does Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a Trump surrogate, a guy who effectively dropped out of his independent presidential bid to explicitly endorse and partner with Donald Trump, a guy who may very well, if Trump wins, have a seat at the table, maybe a position in the Trump cabinet. He's been making the rounds as a Trump surrogate. And in that interview with Neil Cavuto, which so triggered Donald Trump, even Robert F. Kennedy Jr. acknowledged that Trump did terribly.
He says, and he's commented a couple of times today, that he won the debate, and all the polls show that he won the debate. I haven't seen a single one to show that. What did you think of that reaction?
Well, I have seen those polls. They're not. They're polls that you see on on the internet, and a lot of them probably have statistical problems with them.
Right.
But
so again, it gets worse here. Like, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is clearly nervous about completely sandbagging Donald Trump, his new master, even though he said publicly when he endorsed the former president that, hey, listen, we have substantive disagreements and we will continue to substantively and even publicly disagree. Seems like RFK Jr. is being really uncomfortable about publicly expounding the truth that Trump lost the election. He's stuttering, he's stammering, he doesn't want to say that those polls that Trump is citing suck. And they're actually much more credible polls which say that Trump lost. And we'll get into juicier, spicier clips of RFK in just a second. Actually, as a matter of fact, let's go ahead and skip to it. On the topic of polling, RFK Jr. acknowledges that he expects that polls among independents, the people that Donald Trump has to court in order to win, will reflect a dip during the next polling cycle. RFK Jr. expects that Vice President Harris will have captured more independents as a consequence of this debate.
Right. But I would suspect that the polling over the next week is going to show, probably a slight drop in his support, particularly among independents, as people migrate, because I think.
And he really doesn't want to say what he's saying, but he says more. And again, this is part of the interview, or this is part of the interview that Donald Trump was so triggered by. Here, RFK Jr. kind of lets it slip. Okay, Donald Trump didn't do very well, and the vice president did.
But he got distracted. Yeah. And I think it's unfortunate because I think he really had an airtight argument for his presidency, but he was not able to make that case to the American public. But
he got distracted like a child, in front of whom you would dangle car keys to entertain. It's shiny and bright. I mean, that's precisely what happened. The vice president did indeed throw him off, as well she should. Of course, I disagree with RFK Jr. that Trump had an airtight case for his presidency. His presidency was an abject failure. What's funny about that is, what's so damn funny is that RFK Jr. himself repeatedly publicly criticized Donald Trump's presidency. I'll probably try to fish that quote out real quick because I just now remembered that one of the tweets went viral. I mean, RFK Jr., when he was running against President Biden and Donald Trump, at least at one point went through this lengthy screed on Twitter, describing many, but not all, otherwise it would have taken a novel, the many ways that the Trump presidency was an abject failure. Now RFK Jr., this just goes to show how unprincipled he is. Now he's saying, well, Trump had a really airtight case for his presidency because his presidency was good. He just got distracted and failed to deliver, which also suggests some sort of cognitive dysfunction, right? If he was so effortlessly thrown off his track, especially given his enormous experience in presidential debates. So I'll try to find that clip. And in the meantime, here's another.
She's been very skillfully kind of hidden, and she has not done an interview. And this was really an ideal forum for her because there are these 90-second sound bites, and you don't really go into the next level. And I think that she's very vulnerable in a long form interview that she'd do on a podcast or on a program like this. I think this is the ideal forum for her to display, her kind of skills. And I think she did that very well. And I think President Trump did not tell his story, which is a very, very good story about his presidency. And I think that he didn't convey that as well as he could.
Yeah, it's just, I'm listening to this. And again, he's acknowledging the reality that Trump did terribly. But when I just hear RFK Jr. talk about how good his presidency was, it's so freaking gross, given that RFK Jr. was such a stalwart opponent of Donald Trump, at least during the initial part of his campaign. But it's amazing how, your recollection changes. Of course, as a reminder, RFK Jr. apparently had a brain worm. If you recall, there was a story that went viral where doctors had to remove a dead worm from within RFK Jr.'s brain. And he said that there probably wasn't damage, or perhaps there was, but only slight. So maybe RFK Jr.'s judgment is somewhat questionable, especially given that his principles and his assessments change very radically depending on what the current political disposition is. But again, so fascinating that even RFK Jr., as uncomfortable as it makes him, acknowledges that Donald Trump did not do well in that debate. So bad that Neil Cavuto, which this also likely triggered Trump, given how Trump worked desperately to persuade RFK Jr. to drop out of the election and endorse him. Well, Neil Cavuto asks if RFK Jr. has any buyer's remorse.
But just to be clear then, Robert, you are not changing your mind or fearing that you hooked up with the wrong horse here, that you're still supporting him to take the White House? No,
on the issues that I consider important. I mean, look, what You know, I was listening to the substance, and on the substance, President Trump wins.
But just to be clear.
Yeah. So on the substance, Donald Trump wins. Donald Trump had a disastrous debate. I'm not second guessing. Well, I found the post from RFK Jr. Talking about his critique of Donald Trump's presidency. Okay, and for context, I'm going to read the full thing here, but unfortunately, I can't zoom in particularly closely because it's just an image here on Twitter. But I have another window of it up, and I'm going to read it to you. So he says, President Trump scammed American workers. He promised to bring back manufacturing, raise wages, fix trade deals, close the carried interest loophole, and help small farmers. But everything Trump achieved were things the Republican machine wanted. We got a tax cut for Jeff Bezos, deregulation for special interests, and giveaways to agricultural conglomerates. Trump let the Bush wing of the GOP run all his agencies. His Interior Secretary was an oil and gas lobbyist. His Defense Secretary was a Raytheon lobbyist. His EPA Administrator was a coal lobbyist. His HHS Secretary was a pharmaceutical lobbyist. And his Labor Secretary was a lawyer for mega corporations. Trump's supposed support for farmers, $28 billion, all went to big ag conglomerates. We had the worst rioting and looting this country had seen since the 1960s under Trump. He inflamed racial tensions and didn't keep us safe. Instead of using federal law enforcement to stop the rioting, Trump thought it was good optics to let Democrat-run cities burn. Trump bragged about arming Ukraine more than Obama did. He walked away unilaterally from the intermediate-range nuclear missile treaty with Russia, destabilizing our relationship. He also exacerbated tensions between Ukraine and Russia that ultimately caused a war. Trump appointed the worst neocons to the highest positions of power in his administration, John Bolton, H.R. McMaster, and Robert O'Brien. Now, Lindsey Graham is one of his top advisors and likely to be a Secretary of State. Trump bombed Syria, killed an Iranian general, and failed to fulfill his promise of ending the war in Afghanistan. Trump invented lockdowns. He shut down millions of small businesses and facilitated the greatest wealth transfer to billionaires in this country's history. Trump did nothing to solve the opioid crisis. It got far worse under his tenure, while his appointees running HHS were in the pocket of big pharma. If you think a second Trump term would be any different, you are engaging in wishful thinking. And by the way, you might be thinking, well, that was from 2 years ago. It was from late May, 2024, just a few months ago. That guy who said all that about Donald Trump changed his mind completely about Donald Trump, effectively withdrew from the race, endorsed Donald Trump, may get a cushy role in the Trump administration should Trump win. But even he, for all the slime and lack of principle, is publicly acknowledging, even though his political career depends on Trump winning at this point, that Trump lost that debate pretty badly. He was reluctant to say so because, of course, RFK Jr. is a hypocrite and unprincipled and a coward. But he finally admitted it on Fox News to Neil Cavuto. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why Donald Trump is so damn angry at Neil Cavuto and Fox News yet again. In the meantime, you let me know what you think in the comments.